blackmail the states and bully them into doing what they want. Okay, that's what we call extortion in the normal world, but it's legal extortion for them. When it comes to the people, well, we just stopped teaching the Constitution. And so the people don't know it, they don't understand it. If you don't know something, you can't really defend it. We're witnessing the defects within the system now. It's not to say that the Constitution needs to be rewritten. It is to say that there are several things that have gotten out of whack when it comes to the separation of powers and checks and balances, and that's why the Founding Fathers thought it was essential to have Article 5 bypass around Congress to do constitutional amendments. They didn't trust Congress either. Okay, they understood that governments, as they expand in power, they're going to abuse that power. And we've been witnessing the abuses get worse and worse. We just had a governor of New Mexico unilaterally declare that she was suspending the Second Amendment for 30 days. She has no authority, no jurisdiction to do this, but consequences be damned. Now, thankfully, the courts did step in and already threw it out, but the fact is that she tried. Now, if you think back like 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of. And then the pandemic came. And the pandemic changed a lot. The government, the federal government, saw how much they could get away with. The state governors saw how much they could get away with. Instead of ruling through legislative bodies who are supposed to represent us, they did it through decree. They determined when we can leave our homes, when, where, and how we practice our faith, what we must wear when we leave our homes, what businesses are essential, what businesses aren't essential. People that never held a real job in their life were determining what businesses are essential. Think about that. Okay, even worse, they shut down schools in some cases for up to 2 years, destroying and damaging an entire generation that we're now seeing the results of. Then you factor in how governors like Kate Brown of Oregon actually encouraged her residents to call the cops on each other if they saw more than 6 people in each other's homes. Think about that. Like, those are tactics you actually see in North Korea, in Saddam Hussein's Iraq. And now you're seeing them here in the United States. So something's fundamentally broken, something has to happen. And that's where Article 5 Convention of States comes into play. We know Congress is not going to change their ways. We're watching it right now in front of us. Look at the budget debate that's going on. When Republicans do talk about cutting spending, it's not really cutting spending, it's just spending a little less money than Democrats. Our national debt is $33 trillion. We are spending $500 billion in interest alone on that debt. To put that in perspective, we spend $850 billion on defense. And we can't even track an F-35 in this country. Amazing. Okay, but when you look at that, people aren't looking at the interest, but the interest is slated to jump up to $800 billion by 2025. It's going to be over $1 trillion by 2027. So we need fiscal restraints, and Congress isn't going to put it on us. Why aren't they going to do it? Because by the time the House of Cards collapses when it comes to government spending, well, the average age of a senator is close to 70, and the average age of a House member is about 56, 57. Most of them are going to be out of office by then. When we look at someone, anyone know who's running for re-election in California who decided she's putting a hat back in the race? Good old Nancy Pelosi. Okay, spending over 40 years in Congress. Did she make the situation better? No. You look at numerous politicians, they literally have spent a half century. I was talking to my students the other day, and we were talking about qualifications and experience and accomplishments. You have someone like President Biden, 50 years in government service. So I had a simple question. Out of 50 years of government service, name me one significant accomplishment he's had. And they couldn't do it. Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi all name me an accomplishment that they had, and they couldn't do it. Why? Because, right?
They do bomb people.
That they do. But when we're looking at it, that's the amazing part. People have equated length of service into experience and qualifications. Just because you spend 30 years in something or 40 years in something doesn't mean you're good at it. You still could be terrible at your job. And many of our congressmen and women are. So we need to do something to change the dynamics. See, the Founding Fathers, when they first set up and established the Constitution, Article 1, Sections 2 and 3 laid out terms of Congress. To be in the House of Representatives, 25 years old, citizen for 7 years, and a resident of the state you're running. For a Senate, 30 years old, citizen for 9 years, and a resident of state 20. Back then, they had built-in term limits. It was called death. If you're lucky enough to get into the Senate at 30 years old in 1787, how many terms do you think you can serve? Okay, so if you want about 1, 2 terms for the average. Our founding fathers wanted a citizenship legislature, where the citizen legislature would be ordinary people from ordinary jobs that would go meet once a month, for a month, about every 2 years, in order to handle the people's business. And then they would go back to their regular lives. It wasn't paid positions. It was called public service for a reason. You are servants of the public. Well, now they think we're servants of theirs. And that's a big part of our problem. So an Article 5 Convention of States can solve the problem with term limits. And if you look at Poland, 80% of the American people, regardless of political party affiliation, support the idea of term limits. When it comes to fiscal restraint, we all know what's going on. We all know this is unsustainable long term. We all know that Medicare, Social Security, the entitlement programs that we have that are separate from Medicare and Social Security, they keep on increasing in cost. We're not taking in enough revenues. We keep on increasing our national debt. We keep on printing money. We have high inflation, partly because of that, and energy prices. So we know Washington's not going to rein in the government spending. We know the states, many of them, are reliant on government giving them money, the federal government. 25% of the state budget actually relies on federal funds. And so Congress, they don't have to push through amendments to curtail their own powers. Why would they do that? And they're not going to have states ratify something that's going to curtail their powers, so it's up to we the people. We have forgotten the concept of federalism, where we have 2 levels of government, neither of which are created by the other, and both operate independently of each other. Now, today we have new federalism, thanks to FDR who started it. Now we have 2 levels of government, one of which is wholly dependent on it. And in order to break free of that dependence, we need to bring in and rein in the fiscal insanity that's going on in Washington, D.C. When we look at federal power and federal overreach, just look at the regulatory bodies that exist. Our legislative body will pass laws. But then the bureaucrats come in, and they're the ones that are going to interpret these laws any which way they see fit. Consequences be damned. And it's what has led to growing power in the federal bureaucracy. If anyone has noticed, the federal bureaucracy is a little bit out of control right now, right? Targets political opposition, thinks that it could shut businesses down just for no reason. Oh, well, we don't like what you're doing, so we're going to target you. We'll just audit you. Good luck getting lawyers and having to spend money on that and then bankrupting businesses. We see so much red tape that it's almost impossible to start a business today. Home Depot, one of our co-founders of Home Depot stated that if he wanted to start Home Depot today, he couldn't do it because of all the regulations that exist. Now, I mean, they want to now regulate coal and wood-fired pizza ovens. That's where we draw the line, especially in Staten Island. Especially, we draw the line. Okay, that's the best pizza you can get. But think of every aspect of our lives is now being regulated. For every law that's passed, there are dozens to hundreds of regulations that are part of that law that not even Congress intended. And yet, Congress doesn't use their power of oversight to rein it in. Instead, they grow the federal apparatus even more. Don't forget, it was under Republicans that we saw the largest expansion of government in history with the Department of Homeland Security. And that really changed the dynamic. I used to be in emergency management and Homeland Security prior to teaching full-time. And so we really saw the dynamic change. We saw the federal apparatus get even more powerful, more abusive. Looking into every aspect of Americans' lives. Between the NSA and the metadata capture program called PRISM, you have the United States Postal Service. So they deliver mail. There are postal inspectors to check and investigate mail fraud, so they do have special agents. But how many people are aware of the ICOP program that was in place for several years, where postal inspectors will monitor in social media channels, flagging posts and sending them to the Department of Homeland Security? Most aren't aware of it. How many are aware that last year, on 4 separate occasions, the federal courts came out and stated explicitly that the FBI broke the law by illegally accessing the NSA's repository for information on Americans? On 4 occasions. Most Americans are unaware of that. We're now aware of the Major Censorship Act, apparatus, that we see being built out, not only within government, but by help by academics, where over $5 million of your taxpayer money has gone to the University of Wisconsin to build out a censorship program, where they're going to strategically identify information and correct it in the public domain. You have Carol Crawford of the CDC that was forcing Twitter to censor tweets that she deemed contained, quote, unapproved opinions. I mean, think about that logically. A government bureaucrat saying that people have unapproved opinions. Since when the hell does government get to dictate what opinions are approved and which ones aren't? So we're in serious trouble now. And then a new poll came out today, an Annenberg survey, where 77% of Americans can only name one freedom in the First Amendment. Think about that logically. You have 33% of Americans that don't know we have 3 branches of government. Do you think they know we have an Article 5 Convention of States that we could call? And when I teach this to my students, Article 5, it opens their eyes. Now, it's funny because I did participate in Williamsburg, Virginia, in the Convention of State simulation, and it was one of the best experiences I ever had. Why? Because I'm constantly getting pushback from people who are not political scientists. Not that political scientists are all that smart, believe me, have them morons. But they say, well, what happens if we call a convention of states and we see a runaway convention? And they rewrite the entire Constitution. I will tell you...
Communists.
What?
They'll make us all communists.
Well, the thing is, we're seeing our Constitution be rewritten.
Yeah.
We're seeing it be thrown away, disregarded, because the Constitution is the only roadblock towards authoritarianism. And now, if nobody knows the Constitution, if the entire generation of youth is not taught about the Constitution, they're not going to defend it, right? You can't defend what you don't know. And that's what's going on in the United States. So when we look at this, the idea of a runaway convention is an impossibility. It's not going to happen, and I can tell you why. First of all, when you petition to hold a convention of states, it's a limited convention of states. You have to state the reason. You need 34 out of the 50 states to approve a petition to start a convention. Do you think it's easy to get 34 out of 50 states to agree on anything? So now let's say we actually have the convention. We finally get it pushed through. Now when I was in Williamsburg, Virginia, and we were participating in the Convention of States simulation, I went down there making assumptions. Of course, when you make assumptions, you're going to ask yourself like I did. And I'm thinking, all right, most of the participants there, they got to be Republican. They're mostly going to be conservative. We're easily going to be able to push amendments when it comes to things like term limits, fiscal restraint, bringing in federal power. Boy, was I wrong. Okay? And it's really amazing. So here are a lot of people that are like-minded, that while we all agreed that term limits should be in place, there was a lot of dispute about what the term limit should consist of. Should it be 6 terms in the House to total 12 years and 2 terms in the Senate to total 12 years? Should it be 18 years in Congress? Doesn't matter if it's the upper house or lower house. And there was a lot of dispute. And it was really hard to get any real agreements out of it. And it really started to open my eyes. Something as simple as term limits that everyone could agree on. Well, it's easy in theory, but when you start putting specifics to it, it gets a lot more difficult. Reigning in judicial power. That also wasn't that easy. There was no right or wrong answer. There was universal agreement that we should hold to 9 Supreme Court justices. Everyone agreed on it. But how do we make sure that the Supreme Court of the United States makes rulings based on the original intent of the Constitution, based on the letters of the founding fathers, based on the original documents of the United States? Well, there was a lot of disagreement about it. Because if we force the Supreme Court into one area, well, it have impacts on the other areas. When it came to federal lands, okay, we have federal lands now in New York State. It's not as big of an issue as it is compared to the Midwest. But there are some states where the federal government controls 80% of the land in those states, and there's no recourse. And they control all the resources on those lands that those states can't use in order to make their states better, improve their states, invite employers into their states, create jobs, and expand. So there's a lot of complicated issues. Fiscal restraint. I sat on the Fiscal Restraint Committee. Again, this is something I thought, we'll come to an agreement quick. We'll have it done in like 2 hours, and then we'll just be able to hang out and enjoy Williamsburg, Virginia. Okay? Took us over a day to come up with something. Why? Because what type of restraint do we put in? And then we have to worry. You know, there are times where the government, you know, there's a lot of people that talk about balanced budget. I support balanced budgets. But there are times where the federal government's going to have to spend more money, right? If we're in the middle of a world war, which God only knows this president's stumbling us into, then we're going to have to spend more money than we're taking in. And so we have to make caveats. What if we're facing an economic depression? And then how do we prove that? Because you don't want Congress to just make excuses to spend more than we're taking in. Oh, it's an economic depression, so we need to, you know, because the Fed says so. And so we need to spend more money. And so we had to come up with certain tools and mechanisms where, you know, 3/4 of Congress could vote to suspend the balanced budget if there is some type of national emergency. Now, 3/4 of Congress getting them to vote on something is much more difficult than just getting a majority in the House and 60 votes in the Senate. So we did put in some things. I wanted to see something that got shot down, but I think it was brilliant. So I created it. I wanted to tie congressional salaries to the actual budget, where if Congress spends more than they're taking in, their salaries get reduced by 10%. And every subsequent year, they get so an average congressional salary is about $175,000. So after year one, it would drop down to $58,000. After year two, it would drop down another 10%. After year three. Do you think if Congress had stake in the game and it was their paychecks on the line, do you think they'd be a little bit more responsible with taxpayer dollars? Do you think you'd see billions upon billions of dollars? How many people know that we spent over $500 million on democracy programs in Venezuela over the last 5 years? How well is that working out? Is Venezuela more democratic today or more authoritarian today? And the Biden administration just approved 450,000 work permits for Venezuelans that have crossed over on the border. So when you look at it, we're spending money on democracy programs down there. The Venezuelans are coming up here. It tells you something's broken. We also spent $400 million on building walls. Not here in the United States, of course, but building walls in Tunisia, building walls in Egypt, Jordan, Oman. Interesting. Walls work over there. They don't work over here. So something is broken. So when we call the Convention of States, anyone that thinks that the convention is going to be run away is foolish. They never participated in the Convention of States. They wouldn't know because they didn't participate. The reality is that we thought, every single person there thought they had good ideas, and they didn't realize that it would be difficult to get an agreement, just a simple majority to support those amendments, to send them out of committee to the floor, and then it would all go back to the states. And even if it did go back to the states, in order to get those amendments ratified to the Constitution, you would need 38 states to do that. 38 states. So it's difficult enough to get 34 states to agree on anything. It's really going to be difficult to get 38 state legislative bodies or ratifying conventions to approve these amendments. So does anyone think that we're going to see some type of radical proposal, a ban on the Second Amendment, and that 38 states would approve something like that? That is not going to happen, especially when you consider the makeup of the states. Okay, while President Biden may be in the White House, while the Democrats control the Senate, while we're in the once great state of New York that has been under Democrat totalitarianism for the last several years, when we look at it, they're not going to be the ones to dominate this Convention of States. Okay, Republicans actually have the majority of state legislative bodies. I think it's about 22, we control both houses in the states. Democrats control both houses in 17 states. The rest are mixed. You have Republicans controlling one house, Democrats controlling another. So even if a controversial amendment was proposed, it probably wouldn't get approved at Convention of States And even if it did, it would never survive the actual ratification process. There are a lot of myths, and there is a certain group of people that wouldn't want to see a convention of states. And that includes Democrats and Republicans. Why? Because the convention of states actually returns the power back to the people the way it was intended. A convention of states limits the government's power. And that's why they don't want to see it. A convention of states will limit the lobbyists and the influence that they have over the system, dark money within the system. It limits their power. And that's why they don't want to see a convention of states. If you notice something that's been occurring, and I've noticed this throughout my career, every single issue, the knee-jerk reaction is to look to the federal government to solve the problem.
Yes.
That's every single issue. And Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, progressives are all guilty of that. Now, the progressives and Democrats, they like government solutions. But Republicans that preach and conservatives that preach for limited government, why are we looking for the government to solve our problems for us? We have responsibilities and obligations in our own communities without government involvement. And when it does require some government involvement, well, that's where we need to start with local government and then work our way. Unfortunately, both Republicans and Democrats have invited in the federal government. And as the power expands within the federal government, the people are the ones that suffer. It is our liberties that get curbed, where most Americans think it's government that allows us to exercise our liberties, that it's government that gives us liberty. No. A liberty is inherent because we're human beings. The founding fathers laid it out clearly. And unfortunately, most Americans don't know that anymore. We have a major problem. We have major problems in this country. But the biggest problem is that the federal government has gotten so massive that even they don't know how many federal agencies there are. And this is probably one of the most frightening aspects. You would think, in the age of Google, the age of the internet, I could just go on a search engine and type in how many federal entities exist. And I would get a number that pops out. Here's how, well, there's 15 cabinet level departments, at least they know that. But here's how many agencies, here's how many sub-agencies exist, here's how many regulatory commissions exist, here's how many government corporations exist. It should all be laid out very clearly. Do you know that Congress actually had to commission a study to determine how many federal entities we have? But here's the kicker. It tasked the Government Accountability Office, the National Archives, the Federal Register, and then OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, to conduct this study. They all came back with different numbers. Every single one of them came back with a different number.
Was anyone right?
No. Well, I shouldn't say that. We still don't know. We still don't know. There hasn't been any type of universal agreement on how many federal agencies exist. When this country was first founded, it was 3 cabinet-level departments. That's it. State to handle diplomacy and foreign affairs, Treasury to handle monetary policy, and war. That one's self-explanatory. Now, there's some that came about that we understand, like I would not want to travel without the Department of Transportation and the FAA controlling the skies, right? I wouldn't want to go on an airplane if every single state gets to make up their own rules as to whatever. That would be a disaster. So we understand that there has to be some government involvement, but it's supposed to be limited. And be wary of those that preach about limited government, and yet they constantly vote to expand government. We don't hold our politicians accountable, and that's why we're in this mess in the first place. The American people have withdrawn from the political process. Our voter turnout is actually absolutely horrendous, particularly at the local levels. And look at the results we're getting. People wonder why. Well, it's because we're not participating. We're not making demands of our government. We, the people, are sovereign. The states are supposed to be sovereign. And we need to have our voices heard. And the best mechanism to do that I see, to rein in the federal apparatus, is through a convention of states, because Congress is not going to do it themselves. We have seen it. It's clear that it doesn't matter if Democrats are in power, Republicans are in power, budgets have expanded, debt has expanded, wars have begun, even though there's not been an active declaration of war since World War II. We just transfer the taxpayers' money out, consequences begin. So it's time for the American people to step up. And I'm going to take questions too.
Sure.
So I want to open it up to questions because we need to have a dialogue and thoughts, opinions, what's your questions and concerns, how can I answer them?
I'm just a little concerned about some of the statistics you're coming with. I taught history for 25
You
years.
should be very friendly.
I did. I immediately got a constitution in the hands. I contacted my congressman, I got a constitution in the hands of every single student I ever taught American history to. So I'm kind of shocked because I have to say a lot of my students from every gamut of ability knew instinctively, and I do think, public broadcasting and cop shows, they know their constitutional amendments, they know some things innately. Because of that, no matter how many high-level students I taught to how many low-level students I taught, so I'm kind of surprised. And I know the New York City public school teachers do have high standards, and they're mandated and required to teach civics senior year. So I'm kind of confused by that.
Well, here's the thing. So when I give my students constitutional exercise. It's another brilliant exercise I did. And I do it because I like shaming. I believe shaming, especially among students, works. You embarrass them. There's no safe spaces in my class. And what I do is I give them the Russian Constitution. And I just replace Russian Federation and Duma with everything. Now these are college students. So Russian Federation is now United States. Duma is now Congress. I want you to read it. I want you to write 2 paragraphs on what you think of this document, this Constitution, and we're going to discuss it in class. Now, I teach over 235 students a semester. There's a handful of students that will email me and say this isn't the Constitution. And that should be the assignment. One sentence, this is not the United States Constitution. Instead, what do I get? I get these long, detailed responses about the foresight of the Founding Fathers and how brilliant the Founding Fathers were to talk about pension systems and healthcare. Because the Russian Constitution was developed in 1991 or 1992 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it's a modern-day constitution. And they'll talk about how great this document is. And I keep the stats. 90% of my students cannot distinguish the Russian Constitution from the American Constitution. And the Russian Constitution starts off with, we the multinational people, not we the people. Okay? That sent shockwaves. So the question is, what are students actually learning? And one of the things that we look at is that civics, the half year of government that they get their senior year. Well, a half year of government, and I know that they get some government in 4th grade and in 7th and 8th grade, they get a little bit of government. But a half year is not enough.
They get a year and a half at high school, a year of American history and a semester of senior. So I'm kind of confused.
Why not every year?
Right, well, they're learning global studies and everything.
By the time they get to my class, they should be able to almost recite the Constitution.
To be
And they
fair,
can't.
in history, they don't teach civics.
And here's the problem with it.
I taught American history and I taught civics, so that's why I taught the
Well, we do college surveys.
Yeah, I'm a New York City school teacher and I teach history and government. And I teach.
But here's the problem.
Constitution.
Here's the
Put
problem.
it into the hands of.
Some teachers teach it.
That, yes,
The majority of teachers do not. In fact,
you're the outlier.
they'll teach parts of the Constitution maybe and put in their own interpretation of it. But in our surveys, and I'm talking about at the collegiate level, the #1 response as to why they never read the Constitution after 13 years of an education, at least 13 years, it was never assigned to me.
Yes.
It was never assigned for me to read the full Constitution. It was never assigned. They never read the Declaration of Independence. Our education system has collapsed. Only 13% of students are proficient in American history. Only 22% are proficient in American civics. New York State performed twice below the national average when it comes to proficiency levels in education. What did the Board of Regents do? Instead of saying, oh my God, this is horrific, we need to fix this, they said, we're actually going to change the definition of what it means to be proficient to reflect the new normal. That was a direct quote from the New York State Board of Regents.
Yes, it's true. I was threatened many times with past students, and I said, I'm not going to put my name to academic forward. You go ahead and do that. So then it's true that they get threatened, as many teachers do.
Yes, and students just get cycled through.
There's
It's the foreign language. Yet we we encounter government every single day, whether we're students in the classroom, teachers in the classroom, no matter what education system you're going through, you have to get accredited by accrediting institutions who have acknowledgments by the states. The states run the education systems and the local governments do. If you want to get a job, occupations are regulated by the government. In a lot of cases, you have to get licensed by the government. You want to open a business, you have to deal with all levels of government. You fill up your car with gas, you go to the grocery store, you're dealing with government. Every aspect of our life involves government. And yet we don't teach it like that. Why isn't it a required course separated out from history? Because politics and government is different actually from history. They piggyback off each other, but they are different. But why aren't students learning about government each and every day? Why, when I bring up Article 5, my students look at me dumbfounded that they never even heard of Article 5 in the Convention of States? Why, when they look at the Russian Constitution, think it's the American Constitution? The Russian Constitution has, it's a long document, but I cut it down to about 5 pages, but it has 17 articles. Our Constitution has 7. That's it. We are one of the youngest countries in the world with the oldest codified constitution in the world. You have civilizations that have existed for 1,000 years, thousands of years. Yet our Constitution is the only Constitution that has survived. Why is that the case? That it hasn't been thrown away, it hasn't been changed constantly. Why? Because there are mechanisms that have been put in place. Because our Constitution is a mechanic's guide to how our government operates. Our Constitution is the one Constitution that actually constrains governmental power, limits governmental power. Our Constitution is the one Constitution that says what the government cannot do, even though they do it anyway. But you look at other constitutions around the world, their constitutions empower their governments. And we're losing it all because we don't know our constitutions. And because the bureaucrats that have been there for 40, 50 years have taken advantage. I would love to give them my constitutional test. Imagine how many of them would fail that. Imagine. I should give it to Governor Holt.
How long has COS existed, and have there been any states that have gotten to that point of passing the legislation?
Yes, there are many states that have actually passed convention states. What's the exact one?
We passed in 19.
19?
Yeah, we passed in 19. And we've been around for 10 years.
Okay.
Are these 3 separate amendments, or are these going to be combined into one?
No, they would serve as 3 separate amendments. And it doesn't mean that these would be the convention of states that gets proposed. If we're doing limited convention of states, you know, you may only get term limits. And I'm talking about very limited term limits. Or you may only get fiscal restraint rules, very limited. So that's why the idea of a runaway convention is a joke. It's not going to happen.
And just to feed off what the discussion was moments ago, 1972-73, Fort Richmond High School stopped teaching civics because I never got into any of the classes. That was something I looked forward to, but they were just gone. Then when I was in the Army as a platoon sergeant, I was aghast at the fact that my privates had no clue as to how our government works. And I would then take time, you know, in the afternoons and the evenings, we have our own little civics exams. But these are all people that signed up to the military, wrote a check to the government, signing away their lives, and they had no idea as to how the government that was going to send them into harm's way actually worked.
And listen, I'm not surprised. I mean, you know, and it's not just my students. I gave a speech to a corporation that has over 2,000 employees with it. And prior to the speech, I made them take the same constitutional exercise that my students have taken. Only they actually had it easier. Because my students, the citizenship exam I give them is fill in the blank. Because it's easy questions. Who is the Speaker of the House? And who has the power to declare war? What branch of government? Who's the father of the Constitution? So it's fill in the blank. When I gave it to this corporation, it was multiple choice. And guess what? The results were the same. They did better on one question. I forget what the question was, but they did better on one question compared to my students. But still, 86% of them failed the citizenship exam. 90% of them couldn't identify and differentiate between the American from the Russian Constitution. So it shows you it's not limited by age. But the problem is that the youth are extremely important because they're the future leaders. We don't treat them as if they're the future leaders. And now we live in this bizarre time where it's popular and fashionable to bash the United States, to denigrate the United States, to denigrate our founding, say that the country was built just simply in sin, slavery, and that was it. That was the sole purpose of it.
That's right.
Well, how many people are going to have a loyalty to the country if they think their country was just simply founded in sin? And we're seeing the results of this. We're seeing the effects. Patriotism is that 37% of people believe patriotism is important in our society. Without patriotism, you don't have a country. And this is the fear that I have that's going on. We're seeing our Constitution and the Founding Fathers get decimated in classrooms around the country. And unfortunately, there's not enough people that are standing up and speaking out about this. Listen, this is a country that's not free from sin. Our Constitution is not some perfect document. We have our flaws. But we've tried to advance as a society to create this more perfect union. We recognize the sins that we've committed, and we admit that publicly. We teach it. More people, more students know about slavery and things like the trail of tears in my classroom than they do about the Constitution.
I just want to give a lot of props to conventional states for being like a leader as in terms of actually making the amendment happen. I work with other groups like Wolfpack. They actually moved back from having 5 states agree to their amendment to only 4, whereas you guys are kicking ass over halfway point with 19 states already involved. One of the challenges they talked about was having someone with the balls to be the first one to actually sign. A lot of people, they said even Lee Zeldin was willing to sign an amendment, but he didn't want to be the first one up. But I think you had someone today who's from Staten Island, the first one to step up. What are the other challenges, right? I see a citizens, what do they call it? Citizens audit, but they're doing a lot of essential work to examine, election fraud, things like that going on that can affect our ability to get this change.
Well, we have the most perfect and secure elections. Tell me that's a lie.
What are the main things? Like, I'm really excited to be a part of the New York team. New York is not on the list yet, and I want to get them there. What are the #1 things holding us back? I see you guys already breaking ground with someone who's ready to be the first one there. Big props on that. A lot of groups struggle with that. What else do we really need to get this going?
So I'll explain 2 things. One, the election quick, and then New York. Because or former Congressman Zeldin, he actually made major advances in this election for the governorship compared to previous Republicans that ran. And I don't want to make it a Republican-Democrat thing. Okay, I think both parties are part of the problem, and there are some that act as statesmen, like the Rand Pauls of the world, that will put principle and do what's in the best interest of the United States, rather than just go along with talking points and everything. But when we look at it in New York, the idea of elections and citizens audit. When we say that it was the safest, most secure election, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of voting systems or anything like that. I don't have to go down that rabbit hole. All I have to say is we switched the mechanism of voting 6 months before an election. Our entire way that we have voted for decades, for over 100, 200 years, was switched. And it was flawless. If you believe that, you got a bridge to sell you. Okay, we're talking about a government, New York State government, that can't even fix a pothole correctly. And we're supposed to pretend that there wasn't anything wrong? And then you look at it, and the way it was done, when we had the primaries prior to the general election, over 400,000 ballots from one district in Manhattan were thrown out, invalidated, because they weren't filled out correctly. And yet all in the 2020 election were just approved, hardly anything got thrown out. That's bizarre to me. The numbers don't jive. Even in normal election times, we see a 3% ballot rejection rate. This election was like 0.6% or 0.7%, I don't remember the exact number. But it spoke volumes. Now, what do we need to do in New York? I go around the state criticizing and bashing both political parties. But I focus a lot on Republicans, because Republicans have failed. Why have Republicans failed? Well, because they've abandoned areas. They haven't gone into areas for decades, because we can't win those areas. And so we're not going to get involved in those areas. We're not going to talk to the people from those areas. Something that we need to do, forget a political party label, something that we need to do is not speak to people who agree with us. speak to the people that may actually have an open mind.
Yeah.
I go around to places where they don't believe in limited government like I do. Let's just say that. But all I'll do is ask questions. I'm not a big believer in dictating to people that disagree, because the second that I start dictating to them, they're tuning me out. They're not listening to me. The second I criticize the president and just name call, they're tuning me out. They're not listening. So what I'll do is I'll just ask questions. Are you happy with the additions of the state? No. Do you like traveling on any of the roadways of the city? No. Do you like the tolls that you're paying? Do you like this new idea of the rush hour taxes that can be thrown on you when you drive into certain areas? The congestion taxes? No. Are you satisfied with your communities and the homeless population? No. And everything's no, 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 no. And then I just plant seeds. Who's in power again? What party controls what?
Yes.
Oh, it doesn't. Oh, you don't need a single Republican vote to get anything through. So you can't sit there and say, well, Republicans are equally responsible because they don't do anything. And no, they have no power whatsoever. And so it starts to open people's eyes. They start, and listen, there's going to be the bomb throwers. If someone's sitting there and they're hardcore ideological, don't waste your time with them. But there are so many people that aren't, and we should be going into communities that have been long ignored. Maybe if you went into those communities, you start winning 5 to 10%, well then you'll start winning the election. Then you'll start winning legislative seats on the state level. Then you can win the governorship. Then you can get maybe the COS legislation through. And I think that's the kick. The next election is going to be pivotal. Because I do think that New Yorkers are getting fed up. I mean, if you look at what Zeldin lost by, that was the amount of New Yorkers that left New York State.
Yeah.
Had they not left New York State, he could have actually won.
Actually, what anyway.
And so when we look at that, it speaks volumes.
I got something very important to say about what you just said. I mean, I'm going to agree with 100% with what you say. I'm just a leader. I really am in this business here because I really believe in choice. And I agree. I mean, I'm a history teacher myself, and you know, we have a problem, constitutional problem. Unfortunately, you don't understand anything about the media. The media is really important. They are the ones that are driving this train right now. Because they definitely control the narrative. Okay, so this was Donald Trump or somebody who was they perceived to be a threat to them, who go after the community, and this will be the media approach. I mean, when spoken about George Santos came up, I mean, I spoke with Dion about it. It's like, oh my God, 10 cents win every 10 minutes, daily, political party. 10 minutes. I mean, most of the time I sleep with the radio on. And they were 3 o'clock in the morning talking about the Republican Party and George Santos. George Santos joining the Republican Party. Every 5 minutes, I was listening. Now, my concern is to see that. I wish we had a Republican Party. We really don't. It's a sham.
Thank you.
I mean, he's an activist like I am. He wants the best for his country. I mean, part of the young Republicans and everything, the Republicans. Problem is just, I'm fighting them right now. I'm trying to develop a Republican Party by actually having a voter file issued to me with the voter information in New York County, so we can call these people up, the Republican, conservative, and independent, and actually start a Republican Party.
Yeah.
Guess what? Board of Elections is lacking. The New York County Republicans are lacking.
Yes.
The state Republicans are also like,
Yes.
This is crazy. And then if you get to see the new voter file, the new voter machines that were actually approved by New York State, which are prone to fraud. I mean, there will never be another Republican who's going to win the election. There were 3 commissioners. One of them was a Democrat. He was fighting the machines. The other 2 Democrats, the other 2 commissioners in the board of elections were watching voted for this machine. That will ensure that a Republican would never win, because they are easily manipulated with 2 Republicans.
Well, that's one
And by
of
the way,
secrets.
they use also the board of election as a weapon.
100%.
I'm really afraid of it.
Blunt weapon.
I'm really,
Yes.
I am afraid of it because, you know,
I got hit with it last year.
I have a club, they can make up anything they want. Before, you know, I got handcuffs in my hands.
He's from Upper Manhattan.
I want to
I mean,
reiterate
this is
this
crazy.
issue. Let's
This is
please
really-
stop
I mean,
pretending
we don't have
Republicans are
the
going to win.
It's a huge
Correct.
problem.
They're not. 6.8
We gotta get
million
people involved.
Democrats in this state, 2.5 million Republicans. It's almost 3-to-1 Democrat to Republican. We're losing 300,000 New Yorkers every single year. Most of them are Republican voters. A Republican has not won a statewide election in this state in 22 years. Nothing, not governor, not senator, not AG,
Pataki was the last.
nothing. Pataki was the last one 22 years ago. Please do not think the Republican Party is going to help you. Go in, look for independents, look for people who don't care, look for people who are unregistered, look for others. Republican Party is not going to help you in this state.
No, let me say something quick, okay? Now, if they help me, this is a flip. This thing can be flipped. But I can't do it by myself. I'm not burning the sorcery. I'm not a magician either. But if I get help from the New York County Republican Party, we can flip. I
But the problem
tell you
is
we can flip. Because
the
we
GOP
have a lot
on the
of
council
people.
is
We can do it.
Well, so when we look at it, you have 6 media companies control 94% of the media fund. 6 companies, that's it, control 94% of the media. So that right there is a problem. The second problem, as you say, the state GOP apparatus has been an abysmal failure. Why? Because they're more concerned about keeping their positions of power. And it's become a big problem. And unfortunately, it's led to failures. Now, we are seeing Republican groups crop up outside of the GOP in a sense. We're seeing local Republican clubs being built out in all different areas. We're seeing Gavin Wax and what he's doing with the New York Young Republicans. So we are seeing a lot of changes going on.
We are going to get your ass for it.
But it takes time. And unfortunately, the GOP and even the ordinary people, we don't have the activist base that other groups have. Okay, they are activists, they are trained activists. Many of them are actually funded by taxpayers, which shouldn't be the case. And they know how to get out people to vote. My argument is, if you don't talk to people that disagree with you, you're not going to win elections. You're not going to win them over, and you're not going to win elections. And that's the biggest problem. We like speaking to echo chambers. We like speaking to people that already agree with us and validate our opinions. That's not working, and it's not going to work. But that's the mindset of the GOP at every level, local, state, and the federal GOP.
Given that you spoke about the states being invested in federal funding, I think 25% of their budget, then you have an amendment that they have to put through the resolution that will say that they're going to lose their funding. So does it make more sense to get the term limits in and then have the new Congress put that in rather than have these states that get a lot of money have to cut themselves from it?
Well, again, when you petition to have a convention for a limited scope on these 3 topics, there is agreement with states that the federal government does need to cut spending. Nobody has said it's going to cut the grants that are going to states.
Yeah,
It's balanced budgets in other
the
ways.
states know that the budget gets cut.
Correct.
Chopping.
But when you look at it, most people are unaware. I mean, it's New York State, so it's a little different. There are many state legislative bodies that are actually unpaid positions in other states. If you go to them, they get a stipend for their service. They only meet once every other year still. So you're talking about in other states, they see the money flows. In New York State, how would that go down? I can't answer that question. But yeah, it's a problem, and it's going to be difficult getting agreement. But if you have a limited convention, perhaps you'll find agreement on fiscal restraint. And if there is no agreement, if there is no amendment that can go back to the states, then so be it. At least we'll get term limits made. At least we'll limit jurisdiction, federal
I think having
jurisdiction.
fiscal restraint be on the headline of it, right? Presented inequality with the term limits turns off all the blue people and it gives country and states like you said, you expect it to be all Republican. That's how Democrats see it, as this far-right, crazy Republican thing.
No, that's a great
But
point.
none of us are that here. We're not a bunch of Nazis, whatever they call us. But when they see the fiscal restraints, they just say, like, oh, you want everyone to be smaller. But if you say, do you want to get rid of Mitch McConnell, as much as we want to get rid of Chuck Schumer, then you have agreement. When you start putting fiscal restraints in the front of it instead of after on the Congress, I think it's not mainstreamed, and it's a lot of resistance.
Well, actually, you'd be surprised at the polling when it comes to federal spending. The polling shows that the majority of both Democrats and Republicans actually support reining in the federal spending. Now, when you get to what programs are going to be
Democrat, that
cut,
just means cut the military, that's all that means.
but when you get it, well, I mean, Republicans are also part of the problem. They say spend more on defense, and there's a lot of waste. But when you see the polling, there's actually agreement that the federal government needs to be reined in with its spending, and that's one of the beauties. It crosses party lines. And obviously, if you start attacking Social Security and Medicare, that's going to be the most controversial. Well, that's not getting through a committee. We already spoke about it in the simulation, and there wasn't many Republicans that had the stomach or the support for that. You do need to tackle those programs, but we're talking about a limited scope here. Remember, states have to operate within a balanced budget. Doesn't mean at the end of the year it's going to be balanced, but every year the state has to pass a balanced budget. That's constitutional law. It's in every state constitution. Why should the federal government be any different? Again, unless it's an emergency, which then we understand. So I think there would be some support. Now, if you can't get universal agreement at the convention when it goes back, that's a different story, but that proves the point that you don't have to worry about a runaway convention. You had that.
Make this the last question, so we could kind of wrap it up.
I have a question in form of a question. How do you feel about the concept of student government in relation to this being a part of the curriculum, mandatory in education?
Student government's essential. I mean, you know, when we look at student government runs a lot of things on college campuses, and you look at student government, it's perfect outreach to try and inform the student body of the different mechanisms that exist. But part of our problem is that in certain campuses, not all, like, yes, most college campuses are definitely far left, okay? But there are a lot of them. Go to a community colleges. Community colleges are not radical like the four-year university system. When you go to the community colleges, the student body is actually reflective of our country as a whole. 40% being Republican or conservative, 40% being Democrat or progressive, 20% have their head buried in sand, have no idea what's going on. They're the happiest people out of everyone. But start there to start recruiting people to join causes. It's actually a good idea.
I think, Haley, did you want to say something? Go ahead. Go right ahead.
Might be worth getting one last one.
Okay, one more.
Yes.
My name's Eric Allen. I'm a native Staten Islander. About 20 years ago, I'm a district captain, District 17 in New Jersey, across the river. I got a chance at our state meeting to get more technical. This woman asked about how long this convention states has been around. Well, Mark Meckler was a founder of
Tea Party.
Tea Party, thank you. And one of the things he shared with us was Tea Party was a success and raised up, which became America First type candidates that went to Congress, but the system is broken, the system is corrupt. You send good people to the federal government and not state. You send good people who know the system and they get absorbed by the system. Hence his emphasis, as well as Michael Fowler's, on Convention of States saying, utilizing Article 5, which is not something new, it's in the Constitution from the very beginning. Because the founding fathers, George Mason in particular, had the concept and the idea that there might come a time when the federal government might be powerful and would never want to correct itself. So Article 5 is nothing new. It's been there from the very beginning. It was made for a time such as now. It's not perfect. The process will not be perfect, but it's what we have. And it's the greatest lever we have. And what they're trying to accomplish here, the reason I'm here is I brought some friends here, was hoping we get some more people from because I worship when I live in New Jersey. I attend church here. And the reason I came was to bring people in because I understand that this is a grassroots army. This is, as they like to put it, the woman, Jean Romeo, she does education, she said, this is not a microwave solution. It's going to take time. We didn't get into this overnight. So we can't have any full solution. But right now, part of our role is to get the public, get the elected energized, get them to feel once again that they have control over the system. Because we've all been rooted. You may teach this, I love history. You may teach the Constitution. I'm a product of New York State education system.
I was taught, I didn't remember. It wasn't until I took a course at Hillsdale College on their online website, which I highly recommend. You familiar with Hillsdale College? Hillsdale College has two fantastic courses on the Constitution. When you come into COS, I hope you don't mind.
And they're free.
And they're free. And when you come into COS, it's like coming into a middle of a movie. And these people are doing their best to try to explain to you the middle of the movie. When you take some of these classes, and oh, by the way, if you join COS, they've got the education in COS is incredible. I came out of America, and the education levels the way IBM used to teach me. Just for full disclosure, if you join this organization, let me tell you, these people know what they're doing, they're organized, they have a system. I was very
You're talking about Hillsdale College?
No,
Convention of States.
But I just want to say, because I think this is really important, if a convention of states is called, think of the message that sends down to, even if nothing gets done at a convention of states, think of the message that sends down to D.C. That sends to every member of Congress that we are working to take the country back. And I think just getting a convention held, even if no amendments get through, I think that alone would be a success in and of itself, and that we could build upon.
I just want to reiterate exactly that. Take my thunder. I think this is great because even if nothing comes from it at the end, the fact that we're moving, what people who are in charge care about is not us, but they care about their own power. And if they feel like their power is being in any way threatened, they'll act. They'll do something in some way to save their own power, probably helping us in the long run by mistake, but just to give their own power to do it. So that's why I'm on board, even if it doesn't work.
That's the beauty of the state versus the federal.
Yes.
Because the state wants its power back.
Yep.
That's leveraging the state to take power back.
That's right.
The federal government did not create the states. The states created the federal government.
Yep.
And that's the beauty is you're acting at not a local level, but you're acting at people whose best interest is to take that power back.
So I know that this is the best part when we all get to talk. So I have to cut that off, and I apologize. But someone has to be the bad guy, and I drew the short straw. But I just wanted to say thank you. My name is Haley Shaw. I'm the regional director for Convention of States, so I work directly with them. But none of this would have happened without the New York Team Grassroots Army here. So I think we have to really give a round of applause to the people that put this together, because this is not easy to do. It's not easy to get a group of people together to talk about this. So thank you everybody for coming, and thank you Professor Giordano for also coming and giving us some information, because that was really wonderful. He said that this is the state's check and balance on the federal government. And so if we go to a convention, when we go to a convention, and maybe nothing comes out, the states have never come together and held a conversation outside of the federal government. That is a huge statement that the states are saying, you're not doing what we want you to do. So even just doing that, that's a huge step. If you're not sure how to get involved or what you can do, or if you feel like you don't have time, if you can give 5 minutes a week, that's doing something more than you did before. So what you can do is we have a bunch of information over here. If you've not signed the petition, sign the petition. Signing the petition goes directly to your legislators, so they know that you want this. And the more that comes through their desks, the more they realize that the people in their districts find this important. Write letters as well, that's a huge thing. And then consider volunteering. We have an amazing group of volunteers here, and in New Jersey as well, and all across the country. So we have grassroots armies in 50 states. We have a lot of volunteers, but no act is too small and nothing is too large either. So spread the message. And my last thing is, if you're interested in learning the Constitution again, there's a lot of resources. One was mentioned was Hillsdale College. There's also Patriot Academy, and they do something called Constitution Alive. Highly recommend that as well, because learning the Constitution and encouraging more people to remember what that is, that's going to make a huge difference too. So I just wanted to say thank you to the team and thank you guys for coming. I know there's a lot.